I'm 90 years old now. When you reach this age, there aren't many illusions left. Most of the stories people tell themselves, they fall apart eventually. And when they do, you're left with the truth. The truth is quieter than people expect. It doesn't arrive with drama. It just sits there with you in the room, especially at night when the house is too quiet. For me, that truth is simple. For 50 years, I repeated the same mistake, and I didn't see it while it was happening, not once. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being responsible. I thought I was being the kind of man a family needed. But now, at 90, I can see the pattern clearly. I kept choosing later. Later, I'll spend more time at home. Later, I'll slow down. Later, I'll fix the distance that's growing between us. I believed in later the way some people believed in religion, and later never came. I was 26 when I married my wife, Helen. She had this way of laughing with her whole face. You could tell when she was amused because her eyes would close a little, like the joke had caught her by surprise. We didn't have much money back then. I worked construction during the day and sometimes took night shifts doing repairs at warehouses. Long hours, but that was normal for men my age. Everybody worked hard. Everybody was trying to build something. We bought a small house after 3 years, nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a backyard that flooded when it rained too much. But Helen loved that house. She planted tomatoes along the fence and insisted we eat dinner together every night, even if it was just soup and bread. Back then, I believed I understood what mattered: family, work, responsibility. I thought those things were balanced, but they weren't. The truth is, work slowly began taking up more and more space. At first, it seemed reasonable. A few extra hours meant a little more money, a little more security. Then the promotions came, more responsibility, longer days. I told myself it was temporary. Just a few years, I said, just until things are stable. My son was born when I was 31. I remember holding him the first night in the hospital. He was so small it almost frightened me. His whole hand wrapped around one of my fingers. Helen watched me from the bed and smiled. "Don't worry," she said. "You'll figure it out." And I believed her. But figuring it out, that took longer than I expected. Work kept growing. My days started earlier. My evenings ended later. Sometimes I came home after my son was already asleep. Helen would leave a plate in the oven. We'd sit quietly at the kitchen table while I ate. She'd tell me about her day, about the baby learning to crawl, about neighbors stopping by. I listened, at least I thought I did, but my mind was usually somewhere else. Deadlines, problems at work, numbers that needed fixing. Helen never complained. That was the strange thing. She just nodded when I said I'd have more time soon. "Once this project finishes," I'd tell her. "Once things settle down. Later, later, later." My daughter was born 4 years after my son. By then, my job had grown into something bigger than I expected. I managed crews, projects, budgets. People depended on me. That's what I told myself anyway. At home, life kept moving forward quietly. First days of school, birthday dinners, little plays at the elementary school gym. Sometimes I made it, sometimes I didn't. When I missed something, Helen would tell me about it later. "She looked for you in the audience," she said, talking about my daughter's school play. I remember nodding while I took off my boots. "Next time," I said. "Next time." That phrase followed me for decades. There was always another job to finish, another weekend shift, another promotion that meant longer hours. I kept telling myself I was doing it for them, for the house, for college savings, for stability. And maybe that was partly true, but something else was happening too. Work gave me a clear role. At work, people respected me. They listened when I spoke. Problems had solutions. Home was quieter, more complicated. Children grow slowly, but the changes are constant. You miss 1 year, and suddenly they're different. I didn't notice that happening, not at first. When my son turned 16, he barely spoke at dinner. I assumed that was normal teenage behavior. Helen said he spent most evenings in his room. I shrugged. "He'll grow out of it," I said. But distance doesn't fix itself. It grows. My daughter stopped asking if I'd come to her events. She stopped asking altogether. That should have told me something, but I was busy building a career that felt important, busy believing there would always be time to repair what was quietly wearing down. 50 years of believing later was still waiting for me. I didn't realize how wrong I was, not until much later. Not until something happened that made it impossible to ignore anymore. And by then, the pattern had already done its work. The moment everything finally became clear didn't arrive with shouting or anger. It came in a hospital hallway. By the time Helen got sick, we had been married almost 58 years. 58 years sounds like a long time, but when I look back now, it feels like I blinked too often and missed half of it. The illness came quietly. At first, it was just fatigue. She said she was tired more often. Then there were doctor visits, tests, more waiting rooms than I care to remember. I kept telling myself she was strong. Helen had always been strong. Even after the diagnosis, she didn't talk much about fear. Instead, she asked ordinary questions. "Did you eat today? Did you remember to pay the electric bill?" That was Helen. Even when her body was failing, she was still taking care of small things. One afternoon, near the end, we were sitting together in her hospital room. The machines made those soft beeping sounds. Outside the window, people were walking across the parking lot like it was any normal day. Helen looked at me for a long time before speaking. "You worked very hard," she said. I nodded. It felt like the right response. Then she asked something that stopped me. "Were you happy?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't hear her, because I didn't know what the honest answer was. I had spent decades believing hard work was the same thing as a meaningful life. But sitting there beside her bed, I wasn't sure anymore. Helen watched my face. Then she gave that same small smile she used to give when the kids were little. "You always thought you had more time," she said gently. That sentence stayed with me. She didn't say it with anger. There was no accusation in her voice, just quiet understanding. Helen died 3 days later. After the funeral, the house felt larger than it ever had before. Rooms echoed. The kitchen table where we used to sit together suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. My son flew back home 2 days after the service. He hugged me at the airport, but the conversation was careful, polite. My daughter stayed a little longer. She helped organize things around the house, but even then I could feel the distance. Not hatred, just space. The kind of space that forms slowly when people grow used to living without you. That was when I finally understood something painful. The mistake I made for 50 years wasn't working hard. Hard work isn't the problem. The mistake was believing relationships wait patiently in the background while you finish everything else. They don't. People adjust. Children grow up without you noticing. Spouses stop expecting you at dinner. Eventually, everyone learns to build their lives around your absence. And by the time you slow down enough to see it, the pattern is already permanent. My son calls once every few weeks. The conversations are kind, but they're brief. My daughter visits when she can. She sits with me on the porch sometimes. We talk about small things, weather, old neighbors. We never talk about the years I missed. Maybe that's mercy. Maybe it's simply too late. At 90, you start measuring time differently. You don't think about decades anymore. You think about seasons. Maybe a few more summers, maybe fewer. I spend a lot of mornings sitting by the window now. Sometimes I remember Helen in the garden behind the old house, her hands in the dirt, planting tomatoes along the fence. Back then, she understood something I didn't. She knew ordinary evenings mattered. Dinner at the table, a child telling you about their day, a quiet walk after sunset. Those things don't look important while they're happening, but they're the parts of life that stay with people. Work doesn't sit beside your hospital bed. Promotions don't call you on your birthday. The moments we postpone are the ones that disappear first. If you're listening to me now, I'm not trying to give advice. I'm just telling you what a 90-year-old man finally sees clearly. I kept saying, later. Later I'll slow down. Later I'll show up more. Later I'll repair what feels slightly broken. But later is a fragile promise. Life doesn't always give you the chance to keep it. If this story meant something to you, you can share your thoughts if you want. Not for me, just because sometimes saying things out loud helps people notice what matters sooner than I did. As for me, I spend most evenings in the same chair Helen used to sit in. The house spits quiet after sunset, and when the room is still, sometimes I hear her voice again. Not clearly, just enough to remember what she said. You always thought you had more time. At 90 years old, that might be the truest sentence anyone ever spoke to me.